I wanted to start with this quote. This is from Darwin. And I find it quite enchanting, actually. You know, this is somebody who is really appreciating this complexity, these interactions in the natural world. You know, is appreciating its beauty, and it is really thinking, you know, how do I understand this? What is going on in this world around me? And I find that very inspiring. So I wanted to take you way back. So we are going to, let's say, 500 million years ago. And there is life in the oceans. So in water, we have big organisms living there. But the land is still relatively barren. So the microbes in there, but there are not a lot of really big organisms. There's certainly no plants, no animals there. There might be some fungi growing, but not much that we would see as, you know, big forms of life there. We then fast forward, so this would be maybe 70 million years later, so quite a long delay, and now the planet is green. So now we've turned the planet green, plants have established, they come out of the water, they become large, they learn to live in a dry environment. And that is quite a long delay. Living on dry land is very difficult, okay? And it is quite likely that it is this association between plants and fungi that really was the successful combination, okay? So one of these interactions. We then fast forward again to the present, and we have this kind of two different environments here. We have this one that we are sort of more familiar with, this, you know, forest environment, really big plants, that tangle bank that Darwin was talking about, really complicated, lots of big woody plants, trees. And then this is in the Scottish Highlands, and this is dominated by smaller plants, okay? And I actually brought some that you can look at. So, a little box, and you can look in there. You can pass it around. So these are, and you can touch, you can smell. It won't hurt you. And what I want to do is to try to sort of get us there, okay? To try to understand how we build these environments. And fungi are very much at work there. So this is the idea of fungi and plants working together. And I'm going to try to talk about two very different studies that we've done. And I'm calling sort of cheekily one of them time travel. There is no time machine. So we're trying to use the information that we can get from organisms that are still alive with us to try to work back to how things might have been. We will never know for sure how things were. But it is nice to try to infer that. The other one, I'm calling it Mission Impossible, and this is because this was a project that it was very difficult to do, and I had people, scientists like to tell each other things anonymously. This is kind of the standard thing that we do, and I was told many times, you know, this cannot be done, and even if it could be done, it shouldn't be done. But here we are, we're going to talk about that anyways. So we have quite a diversity of plants in the planet. There are something like 300,000 species. It's a lot of plants. And most of the ones that we're familiar with are the flowering plants. Okay, so all of our crops, they're flowering plants. There are a lot of fungi. There are a lot more fungi. We don't actually know how many there are, but the lower end estimates are 1.5 million. The higher estimates are maybe 10 million. So it's a lot more than plants. Okay? If we kind of turn them into sort of a very cartoonish kind of diagrams to try to understand what these organisms do and what they do differently. You've got a plant, it's got this above ground part, and it's got this below ground part. We normally, when you see sort of diagrams of plants and trees, people just show the above ground because that's what we can see, okay? The rest is sort of out of sight, out of mind, right? This is how we behave, right? We are visual organisms. But the below ground is sort of another world. Yeah, it's dark, has nothing to do with the above ground. Very, very different. The fungi, they typically grow below ground. They're really good at getting into things. And then sometimes some of them make these reproductive structures that now in the autumn are really nice to go and collect and eat, like mushrooms, like wild mushrooms. Okay, but they don't always do that. They're always growing in the soil like these thin filaments. Okay? So two very different ways of growing, of dealing with the environment. This is very good at getting energy from light. Okay? So when I went to school, and probably when you went to school, you learn what roots look like, and roots look like this. So they grow down, they have this cap here that is pushing into the soil, and they make these little so-called root hairs. So there are single cells that grow out from the root and that allow the plant to take up minerals, take up water, take up resources from the soil. Okay? However, then you grow up and you learn more. And most roots don't look like that. It's very unusual actually to find roots that look like that. Most roots look a lot more interesting. Okay? And a lot of them will look like this. So in here you've got something like this, but it's being covered up with these fine filaments of fungi. Okay? It's like a glove. Okay? So one fungus is actually just taking over the surface of that root. That root is happily alive, and the above ground parts are very happy in growing. This fungus then grows out into the soil and it gathers, scavenges, forages for minerals, for water, brings them into the plant, and it gets paid. It gets paid with sugars. Okay? It gets paid with carbohydrates. Okay? So it's a kind of trading type of interaction there. Okay? And this is pretty common, certainly for trees. So in here you got a little birch seedling, it's got the first leaf here, and it's got a couple of roots that actually look like that, and then the rest of the roots have been modified. They look like this. Okay, so these fungus roots. There's another kind, and this is even sort of more intimate. So now the filaments are going to grow into cells of the plant. Okay? The living cells, and they're going to branch inside, and they're going to make these tree-like structures, okay? And that's to maximize the area for exchange, okay? So they're still going to get paid with sugars and even fats, and then they are going to bring in water and minerals, okay? So another of these kind of exchange relationships going on. So this is very common in these kind of larger plants that we are more familiar with. So the line here is most plants don't have roots. They have these fungus roots or fungi roots. And the terrible name for that is mycorrhizas. It's unpronounceable and unwritable. It's a real shame. I went to a meeting in Japan, and I realized that actually it's even easier to say in Japanese. It's King Kong. So it's just fungus root. Okay? And I wish we could just say that, because maybe we make it a little bit more approachable. But it is a very common thing. Okay? Now, the plant that I was passing around is a much smaller kind of plant, okay? In the very first land plant, so the time machine, 500 million years ago, they probably looked like that plant that I'm passing around, okay? So these are liverworts or hornworts, and when you go to school and you learn how they're supposed to look like, they look like that. So you make a section through it, and there is a part that is green, that gathers light, energy, and then it has a part in the bottom that attaches to the substrate and interacts with the ground. They don't really look like that in reality. They're totally cool. They are full of fungi. Okay? So the cells in here, they're not empty cells, just full of plant cytoplasm. They're actually filled with fungi. Okay? And again, this is the same idea. Fungi are really good at going out. They're very thin. They branch. They make networks. They produce lots of interesting chemicals that allow them to mine the soil very efficiently. And then they bring in all those resources, and they get paid with sugars. Okay? So again, very successful kind of interaction. All right? Are you guys okay with this?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So, so now we're going to try to kind of work through time, okay? And so I was talking about 500 million years ago, and then we have the present on that end, and then we have this kind of branching tree, and it is green, it's the life tree of the plants, okay? So it's kind of how we think plants evolved over time. And I put in here symbiosis with fungi, and that actually happens right probably around there. So that's before plants evolve seeds. That's before even plants evolve roots. Okay? So very, very early on, the first thing that plants do when they come out of the water is hook up with this fungi. Okay? That allow them to grow better. By the way, the word symbiosis was invented for fungi. Okay? It was invented by somebody that worked with fungi. Okay? So it's a kind of a common word now, but it is something that comes from the fungi. The fossils, and there are some good plant fossils out there. they give us some information. It's sort of the closest thing to the time machine, I guess. The best fossils by far are the so-called Rhynie chert. So this is near a little village in Scotland, and this is an early, so the first ecosystem that we have a fossil record for, and it's an incredible. It's sort of a whole ecosystem that kind of turned to glass. Okay, and then you have individual cells of plants that have been preserved. It's very unusual for fossils, and within those plant cells, surprise, surprise, there are fungi. Okay? So very, very early on. So we then have all of these groups of plants that we know today. So the green algae are aquatic, they don't have fungi, and then all of these plants here are the plants that we're more familiar with today. And we've been studying what fungi are in each group. We could talk about this for hours and hours, but we're not going to. It's kind of a cool story. And we got the cover of a prestigious science journal, and there was a documentary maker from Australia that was really inspired by this story. She made an hour-long documentary on sort of plant-fungal kinds of interactions. And she just came out this year, and she won 2 awards, or the documentary won 2 awards in 2 different science documentary festivals. And in the last one, she actually beat David Attenborough, which is what I think to say. So, but I didn't get to walk the red carpet, so. Now I'm going to switch to a totally different kind of topic, but we're going to stay with, of course, with this theme of plants and fungi interacting with each other. And this is more of an environmental story. Okay? So this is from Leonardo da Vinci, and apparently he said, we know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot. Okay? And I think in many ways this is still true. So in 2000, the EU adopted this Water Framework Directive, and this is regulations that are intended to let us control pollution in water systems, okay? And we are very keen on this, and it requires monitoring. Okay? And it specifies what kinds of monitoring you have to do. So you have to go out into the environment, you have to check that organisms are okay, organisms that are living in water are okay. It's not just about people, it's about other organisms as well. Okay? There is then, in 2008, kind of an equivalent framework of regulations that is about air. In some countries, that we've not mentioned, are not very good at keeping up with these kinds of regulations, but at least the regulations exist, and these require monitoring, and the monitoring gets done. Okay? So your taxpayer money is used to monitor these environments. Whether politically then we decide to do anything about it, that's another story. But at least we know whether there are problems or not. Okay? Now, the next sort of logical step would be to do something about soil. Okay? So it's kind of one of the most precious resources that we have. We are totally dependent on soil. And that was proposed, and again, certain countries, including countries that I won't mention, were strongly opposed to this being enforced or enacted, and so that failed. Okay, so we have protection for air, we have protection for water, we don't have protection for soil, at least at the kind of large level, okay, which is really what's needed. So, in 2015, there was this paper published, and it says, tree mineral nutrition is deteriorating in Europe. Okay? So they did quite a lot of work, and they are looking at the leaves, or the needles, and they are assessing the nutrient content of those needles, of those leaves. And they are finding sort of imbalances, okay? So some minerals are in too low amounts, some are in too high amounts. So these trees are in a kind of unbalanced nutritional condition. Okay, so that kind of raises some alarm. Okay, so it's a problem. These trees are probably predisposed for issues that people that work with woodland trust will probably be a little bit concerned about. So, all right. So a slight change of gear here. So how did I kind of get into trying to look at the black box, the soil black box? So when I was young, I was working on these incredible plants. Okay, probably the coolest plants ever. And these are plants that are not green. Okay, so they've given up their most plant-like feature. They're not green plants. So how does it work? So you got a green plant here, very proper, and it has these mycorrhizal fungi, these fungus roots that it associates with. Okay? And I put these double-ended arrows here, so this give and take going on here. It's fair, right? And then you got this fungus here that is connected to the plant and it gets sugars from it. And then it's connected to another plant here that is not green. Okay? That plant can't give, but it can take. Okay? So it's turned the tables. Okay? It's now taking sugars from a fungus rather than giving them. Are you okay with that? Yeah? Bit of a vampire kind of thing going on here. Okay? And this is, it generates a lot of press. You know, we like to see kind of things that seem devious. So in the sort of science press, I got quite a lot of press about this. People were really keen on this, you know, what's going on. And the other thing that I think is very interesting too is that it kind of sets up this kind of arrangement here, this matryoshkas. So you've got this plant, its distribution is going to have to be contained with the distribution of the fungus, and the fungus distribution is going to have to be within the distribution of the plant. Okay, so they're all dependent on each other in a kind of nested way. It's really cool. So there's one of these plants. They're not like vampires. They're gorgeous. They're beautiful things. Okay, and in fact, they are very threatened. And in Europe, we're very much losing them. In the UK, in 2005, the one that we have here actually became red listed. So they're in a very steep decline. Okay, and this is a sad thing. They're really beautiful things. They're not that small. They're pretty big plants. And this one in particular is very dependent on this fungi, the night mushroom, and these fungi are dependent on pine trees. Okay? So there's something going on here, and probably there's something going on with this. Okay? But again, this is out of sight, out of mind. Okay? It's hard to see. Okay? We see this, we see this. Okay? Yes?
How do you know this is not a fungi that looks like a plant?
It's definitely a plant. It has leaves, it has flowers.
So
it is absolutely a plant. Yeah. This is definitely a plant. And in its roots, sorry.
Is it the leaves that's determine it as a plant?
It has the DNA of a plant, and it has flowers, so it's definitely a plant, and it has pollen, and it has all the structures that you would find in a plant. So it is absolutely a plant. Yes, good question. Yeah.
And can I ask why? Like, what's the benefit for the ecosystem of it being there?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think it is a very good marker of an old-growth forest. That is very undisturbed. So you would have to have a network that is healthy enough to support something like this. Okay, so they're kind of the first thing to go. Okay? When you disturb the system.
The destruction of nutrient exchange.
Yeah, that's right. So there has to be enough wealth moving around for this to be able to survive. Okay, and these are very dependent, right? They are totally tied. Their evolution is tied to the evolution of the fungus. Okay. I like this. Good questions. Any other questions? All right. So this is from Peter Maron, and this is a British naturalist, and he was looking at sort of what do we know about fungi. He wrote a book called Mushrooms that came out a few years ago, and he says, we have only a very imperfect idea of the distribution and status of fungi. Hence, it is difficult to assess which species are genuinely rare or declining, and which are merely poorly recorded or simply do not fruit. Okay? And some fungi make mushrooms, some of them make truffles, some of them make crusts. It's not so easy to record where some of these fungi are. Okay? So this has consequences. There's a European Atlas of Cell Biodiversity that came out a few years ago. It has no maps for fungi. If you look at red listings, so there's a global sort of species that are protected. There are some 23,000 species that have been red listed on this planet so far, over 23,000. There are only 35 that are fungi. Okay? And you could argue, well, either the fungi have no problem, they're doing just fine, or we are incredibly ignorant about the fungi. You choose which you think is more correct. And keep in mind that we do use fungi quite a lot in very direct ways. Okay, so we harvest wild mushrooms. Not so much in the UK because it's not such a big market, but in the continent, it's a massive market. Okay, so there's some pretty big estimates in numbers of tons of wild mushrooms that are harvested and traded. And all those wild mushrooms that you cannot grow are the really expensive ones, and those are all fungus root kind of fungus. So, a very crude analogy for you here. Okay? So we got a tree, and it's what we usually think of a tree, it's just the above ground part. And it is green, and it's gathering energy from the sun. And then we've got this tool here, and it's running on a battery. Okay? So I'm not going to argue these are comparable things. This is quite useless unless you have a good tool set. Okay? Right? It's just going to spin around. It's not really going to be able to do anything for you. Okay? But if you have a really nice tool set, then you can use it to do stuff. Okay? To build things, to use your environment. The tree, I'm going to argue, is pretty much the same way, unless it has these amazing biological attachments, which are these fungi. Okay? And each one of these is a different species. They all look different. The shapes are different. The colors are different. They do different things. They have different abilities in dealing with the soil. And remember, the soil is really complex and really difficult to deal with. So, another of these quotes, sorry. So this is from a couple of American ecologists, and this is, they're saying, although it is tempting to throw up our hands given the complexity of the challenge, we believe that the attempt should be made to build global data sets and predictive models, recognizing that this will be an iterative process. The price of not acting now will be a lost opportunity to define baseline data in the face of rapid global change. And I underline here iterative and baseline. Iterative because you're going to have to keep trying it, okay? It's never going to get perfect. This is very difficult things to do, okay? But, you know, the more you do it, the better you get at it, okay? But you shouldn't aim for perfection. And baseline is because without a baseline, we don't know anything, okay? We don't know what is changing unless we know kind of what is the starting point, okay? So if you don't have that data, for scientists, it's just arm waving. Okay? We have to have some kind of baseline. Experiments are not enough. You have to have a natural baseline. All right, so more words. Sorry, guys. So this is kind of my Christmas wish list, okay? Yeah, I'm a scientist. So it is very long, and it's very, you know, there's lots of big words in there. And there are sort of good scientific arguments, to my mind, for each one of the words in there. There are good reasons why I want each one of those things, okay? So I want this kind of fungal data, and I want really good quality environmental data. I want to put the two together, okay? That's kind of my wish list, my mantra, my dream, okay? Total fantasy, okay? That's just not available. There's no forest that will give you that, okay? However, some parts of that are doable. So there is this amazing network of forest monitoring. It's probably the best in the world, and it's called ICP Forests. It is across Europe, and they sort of give me check marks for some items in my list. Okay, so some of this kind of long-term monitoring, they've been doing it. Okay, they started doing this because of acid rain when our trees were dying some years ago, and they continue doing that. So that's very handy. The question is, can we then get this kind of fungus root data, that kind of out of sight, out of mind, actually bring it out into the light, and then try to tie the two together? So, some of these early attempts, okay? So we started out with Scots pine. We were only going to do a few sites in the UK, but we ended up doing some more in Germany as well. And then we worked on oaks, and we worked on their fungus roots, and we ended up doing about 9 countries. A lot of work to do this, and it worked. That was the cool thing. So that's what we kind of kept doing it. Okay, it was working well. You could get this kind of data. So let's try to scale it up. Okay, so let's try to actually get a good baseline. Okay. So there it is. So we managed to do nearly 140 of these plots that are quarter hectare each. And they are distributed across Europe. We have beech, pine, spruce, oak, and we can include a lot of these so-called variables or factors, okay? So this is data that we can use, and that relates to the conditions of the trees, that relates to the environment, that relates to the climate, to the geography. So all of these things play a role here. in defining that kind of baseline. A back-breaking number of soil cores. This is, you have to do this by hand. And a blinding number of roots that we looked at. So we do this individually. Okay? So we looked at 40,000 roots, one by one. Okay, so when you do all of that, we had a really pleasant payoff. We didn't just get data, but we actually get a really sort of top prestigious publication. So this is in what all scientists desire with this Nature, this very fancy journal, and they really went for it. So they do very small print and very few pages. They actually let us do 6 full pages. So we were like, yes, it's happening. I think they really noticed that there was something different here. Okay, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but you can kind of identify how many fungi you've got and things like that. You've got about half of the fungi that we find don't make mushrooms. Okay, so if you're only going to be looking at the mushrooms to see how your fungi are doing, you would ignore many of these fungi. Okay, so that was something that we learned from this. So, are you guys still with me? Okay, all right. So, so now the big experiment, right? So this is the experiment that we are all working really hard on all the time. Okay. So historically, carbon dioxide levels in the air about 300, nitrogen about 0 kilograms per hectare per year. So this is the amount of nitrogen that is coming down from the air, okay, through rain, through dust. And those amounts that were present in the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the lithosphere, so the Earth's crust, were pretty stable. Okay? So now we come into the picture, we have an industrial revolution, and we go crazy. Okay? So now we started dumping as much nitrogen and as much carbon into the biosphere as we possibly can. Okay? We are all doing this continuously. Okay? It's just the biggest experiment ever. And it's working, it's incredibly successful. So we are going just off the scale with the amounts of carbon. Carbon dioxide is a gas, so it diffuses uniformly through the biosphere. Nitrogen tends to be more particulate or things that dissolve, so it tends to be deposited more or less close to where it's produced. Okay, so it's more uneven. There are still places that are really clean for nitrogen and places that are ridiculously dirty for nitrogen. Okay, so so we had this workshop, and we had a lot of conservation agencies and a lot of ecologists come together. And one of the things that we could agree is that to have fundamental understanding, we need this species response functions. And I'll show you what this means. 2 agents of global change from gradients with rich data that is collected systematically. This is kind of a scientist's dream of the kind of data that we want to say, yeah, there's something really going on here. Okay? And when you have that kind of data, then you can do this kind of analysis, and it's just statistics. Again, I'm a scientist, so I get excited about analysis. Okay, so this is the kind of analysis that you get excited about. And if you do that kind of analysis, you can do something called critical loads. And critical loads is the level of a stress beyond which organisms start to suffer. Okay, so we really need to know that. Okay, at what point we kind of overwhelm the system. So this is the hairiest thing I'm going to show you, but I just want to work through it because it's really cool. So it looks really complicated, but it's okay. So you start from 0 up to 40, so that's the amount of nitrogen, okay? So it's going up in this direction, okay? And then you have in black, you have fungi that are most negatively affected. Most negatively affected by nitrogen, okay? And so those, they start going up when you're going between 0 and 5, and then that's the most they can cope with, and then they crash, okay? The ones in white are the ones that can cope pretty well with excessive amounts of nitrogen. They also go up when you go up to 5, okay? And then they kind of wobble along, they might even benefit a bit, and then they crash as well. Okay? So there's a point in which none of them can really cope with this excess amount of nitrogen. 0 to 5 is what we consider pre-industrial levels. Okay? All of the rest are environments that we created. Okay? That did not exist before. Okay? So if you put in Britain here, we go from about 15 to about 30 something. Okay? So we left way behind anything that we would consider kind of pre-industrial levels. Okay? There are parts of Europe that you can still use as a reference point, but we don't have that left here down. Okay? So not all hope is lost. This has a really big impact on these fungi. So there are losers and there are winners. The ones in black are the ones that suffer the most. And you can see these look different from those, don't they? Yeah, so these ones are really hairy and fuzzy, okay? So these work really hard. They're really good at scavenging and hunting for mineral resources and water. And these ones are less so, okay? So now we are moving into a system that is mostly these, okay? So we are really changing these systems below ground. So I'll throw my arms up and say, yes, it is possible to do this, okay? You can actually assess this out of sight, out of mind systems. So what's next? So now we've got this first baseline, we can actually now use this to test for change over time. We're only looking at change over space, over geography, okay? Now we could actually do it over time. We have linked fungi with environment. We have not yet linked them with tree health, okay? This was difficult enough to do. But the next thing would be to link this with tree health, okay? How are these trees coping with this? And there are kind of two options here. We could either be moving the systems into kind of a new optimum, okay? So everything is gonna be okay. Or we're moving into a system in which we are making this helping fungi, we are turning them into parasites in the trees, okay? So we don't know that. We need to find that out. With that, I will thank you for listening patiently, for asking questions. And a lot of people that helped, and some of the funders that more or less reluctantly funded some parts of this. My email is in here, so feel free to send me a note sometime if you wake up in the middle of the night with some question about the fungi and the plants. I'm happy to try to oblige. And then some of the people that help with a lot of this work, most of them whom are students or postdocs. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening.